Go ahead, you take the questions, and I will ask you the questions.
Yes, ma'am.
How does Mrs. Kane feel about this?
Mrs. Kane is terrified. And she has every right to be. I will tell you that I have been blessed that in 42 years of marriage, it'll be 43 in June, that I have been blessed with a wife, a companion, who has been supportive of every crazy thing I wanted to do. And her words and our quote, I said, "Darling, what's your greatest fear?" She told me one morning that you might win. I said, "I do understand." But the good news is our 2 kids are grown, they have their own families, we got 3 grandkids, and so obviously she spends a lot of time with them. And as I tell people, I said, you're not going to see my wife, first of all, she doesn't have the physical stamina to be on the kind of schedule that I have been on. And I'm not going to ask her to do that at the expense of her health. And so, but you will see her at some events, some critical events. But she is very, very supportive, although she doesn't have the desire to be out here at every stop that I make with respect to this. So I'm very blessed in that respect. Yes, sir.
Herman, we know that the president is a money-making machine, and he's already started making money for the campaign. We know how difficult it is to defeat an incumbent. We know how effective his people are in using the internet. We know how they were able to use Facebook and the other social media to get the word out. What would your strategy be, and what would our role be in it, in getting you elected and defeating this guy?
Great. Thank you. First of all, our strategy is bottoms up, not top down. We have built a very, very sizable base of volunteers who have signed up at HermanQA.com in every state in the union. We're in the process of mobilizing those people that have said that they would like to support this dark horse candidate. That's a joke, y'all.
What was that website again?
HermanQAin.com. HermanCain.com. You remember Cain like Cain in the Bible, but I didn't kill anybody. Yes. And so we got a bottoms up strategy. And it's going fantastic. Secondly, we have all of the internet technology tools working for us, and we put it together. In fact, Scott Toomey, who is one of my senior advisors who is with me, that gentleman there, he is the architect of our internet equipment and our system. And to quote Scott, he said, well, I said, Scott, how did you figure all this stuff out? I mean, it's pretty slick. He said, well, R&D. I said, oh, I understand R&D. You know, I used to do research and development. He says, no, rip off and duplicate. So we have developed that piece of it, and this is what's so encouraging about this. Scott and his team have developed metrics to measure my presence on the internet. And it's worked so well. They've developed a metric where we, on average, are getting 6 times the number of internet mentions for every TV mention, beating everybody. And that is because of what we have done to cultivate that audience, to cultivate it with the people on Facebook, to cultivate the people on Twitter. Because everybody likes to get their information a little differently. So we have developed ways to appeal to all of those ways. So we would definitely be doing that. Now, what you can do, since you asked, go to HermanQAin.com. You can either contribute online, you can volunteer, because we're going to mobilize people. And then we got a comment column where you can say, well, I want to spend an hour a week working on the campaign, or I want to put outdoor signs, or I want to write letters. Tell us what you want to do, and we're in the process of mobilizing. And for those people that, you know, don't want to contribute online for whatever reason, we have some little handy sheet cards with the information that tell you where you can, I'm not soliciting, but you can write a check. You can write a check, it's got the address right here. Okay, yeah, I'm just suggesting. That's so we've got some of these that we can pass out, so that's how you can help. We set 4 criteria. One was how quick were volunteers going to step forward. It has exceeded our expectations. Number 2, how much, they call it earned media. You know, like I'm on Fox and when other stations want me on. That has taken off ever since we announced that I did the exploratory back in January. I mean, we get more radio requests and TV requests than I can physically do. And then the third one is the internet presence. We are blowing away everybody else in terms of our ability to be on the internet because we've cultivated that audience. And then the fourth is the fundraising. And what we have found is that the fundraising has not taken off because a lot of people are still sitting back and waiting to see whether or not, well, is he for real? Well, let me put it to you this way. See, because of McCain-Feingold and the rules, we have to be careful of certain things. In January, I put my toe in the water. Today, it's up to my chinny chin chin. No more toe in the water, and we will be making a final decision within weeks, not months. Yes?
Hi, I'm just a little concerned with the Federal Reserve. I mean, they are printing money hand over fist. They are bankrupting this country, and I'm just curious what your position is as far as the Federal Reserve.
I believe we need to fix the Fed, not end the Fed, because this Fed is doing things that were never done when I served on the board of the Fed back in the 90s under Alan Greenspan. One of the reasons that they have gotten off track is their mission was expanded to try and control not only inflation, but unemployment. You can't do that with monetary policy. Secondly, the national debt reaching such astronomical levels is what caused them to start printing all that money and buying our own treasury notes. You can fix the Fed by, first of all, eliminating their mission to try to control unemployment and start to pay down the debt, and Congress has the authority to help them set their policy in terms of the things that they are doing. This administration has politicized this Fed to the point that they print money on a dime. So I happen to believe that we can fix the Fed by changing their policies and Congress providing the oversight that it should provide. Yes, sir.
Regarding the Fed, I believe Bernanke said this morning in his supposedly transparent conference that they really don't have much of an impact on unemployment and job creation. But nobody, at least up until the time I was able to listen, questioned him about the trillions of dollars that went to foreign banks. Now, where in there is it in their law where they have the authority to do that? First of all, they have the authority to bail out so many companies and organizations. How do you bring them back under control? In fact, my theory is, if you're a true capitalist and you believe in free market system, we don't need the Federal Reserve.
Right on.
Let the market determine where interest rates go and where monetary policy goes. I don't know what your reaction would be to that.
Well, my reaction is, before I categorically say we don't need the Fed, I would rather take a look and see whether or not we can fix the Fed, because I do know that there are some functions that they do perform, and I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Some of the things that you mentioned, you're absolutely right, should not be some of the things that the Federal Reserve does. But here again, Congress can put some restrictions on those kinds of things. Yes.
Mr. Kane, you talked earlier a little bit about the President's budget plan versus Congressman Ryan's Path to Prosperity budget plan, and I think very appropriately pointed out some major differences between those two. One thing that they share that has me extremely concerned is that they each run major deficits for at least the next 10 years, and we end up under either plan with a national debt in excess of $20 trillion. How do you address that, and how do we prevent that from happening? Can we survive with that type of debt?
We can't survive if we don't do the things that I described to stimulate the economy. That is the key. With those steps that I mentioned and others, our economy would be growing at 5 to 6% per year. Dr. Dan Mitchell with the Cato Institute has studied the impact of tax rates over the last 100 years. They work if you do them right. The key is growing the economy at the same time we're cutting spending. That was the part that Representative Ryan's plan did not address enough. Don't know why, but he was just trying to address the budget piece. But he did have targets in his plan about where we wanted spending not to exceed. And this is why the liberals are fighting so much. But the key is we've got to grow this economy to its potential. And I know for a fact that it is there. Serving on several board of directors and sitting in board meetings every other month, I heard all the discussions about, well, we don't know what the tax rates are going to be 2 years from now, so we're going to put this decision off, or we're going to build this plant over here, or we're going to do this. The American business sector is operating under a veil of uncertainty. Grow this economy the way it can be grown, and then I think that Ryan's plan might do better than he is projected.
Last question back here.
Tony.
Mr. Kane, one question you haven't addressed yet is that I heard you on television mention something about a national sales tax.
Yes.
Can you please explain the difference between national sales tax and the VAT, or isn't there a difference?
There is a difference.
Thank you.
Let's start with, we now pay tax on income with a convoluted tax code mess that we need to replace and get rid of. Tax on income rates set by Congress. The national sales tax, or the fair tax, is a single rate retail sales tax at the register one time at the retail register for new goods and services. A VAT tax has a tax at every stage of production, from getting materials for the widget, making the widget, distributing the widget, retailing the widget, and buying the widget. Well, the fair tax says you only pay tax when you buy the widget. That's the difference. Secondly, the fair tax, the national sales tax, the consumption tax, you hear different terms. It replaces all of the federal income tax that we pay and the payroll tax that we pay with that single rate, 23% rate at the end of the widget line. I think I'm going to use that again. We pay that one rate that one time. It is designed to raise the same amount of revenue that the current tax code raises. And people will say, well, how can it do that? Our consumption base in this country, folks, what we consume is bigger than the income base. And the income base is getting smaller. And only about 50% of us are paying income taxes. And illegals are not paying any taxes. They would with the fair tax. And drug dealers are not paying any taxes. They would with the fair tax. You see, by imposing the tax at the end of the production retail chain, this is how we replace the tax code. And no more IRS, no more filing income tax forms.
One last thing, Mr. Kane.
Put government workers out of work.
Wouldn't that put government workers out of work?
Yeah.
Yes, it
We're going to do that, actually. Okay, let me do a little commercial for the GraniteOath PAC. A lot of you know the drill, and I want to share it with our guests as well as with folks for the first time. What we do is we ask you all to RSVP online and then to fill out a form and send it in, send in questions. What we do at the end of the evening is we'll collate all the contact information of the people who came, those who wanted to come but weren't able to make it but responded. We'll send that over to Mr. Kane's campaign so he can be back in touch with you. We'll also provide his campaign with the questions you've asked us. And so what we try to do is randomly select a few questions. Now I'm going to solicit, since you did.
Yes.
We do need a little help to maintain this going. You know, none of you paid to come, and we're glad you're here. But if you can help us by making a contribution online, small or whatever you can do to help continue the work we're doing, to give us a chance to expand our reach, we'd appreciate it. It's the GraniteOath PAC, GraniteOath PAC.com.
And he probably keeps his oath.
I tried. Betty makes sure I
has
do.
so far.
Well, thank you for that.
And Oath, and congratulations on Conservative of the Year, sir.
Okay, so here's a question that was submitted to us. How would you go about repealing Obamacare, and how would you reduce the deficit and the debt of the federal government? I suspect the two are somewhat related.
First, I would ask Congress to repeal and replace and go from a government-centric proposal or bill like Obamacare and replace it with a patient-centered bill, which means that we would include tort reform. We would put more choices in the hands of the consumers. We would have high-risk pools by each state, back to empowering the states, not a high-risk pool for the federal government. And you can do this with measures that would in fact help to increase accessibility and bring down costs. In other words, let's let doctors be doctors and let patients make more choices. So I would repeal all of Obamacare to begin with, which won't be easy, but you know, we need to. It can't be fixed in my opinion. Secondly, bringing down the debt. Any businessman will tell you that if you take over a troubled business or a troubled country, you've got to cut multiple ways. I call it horizontal cutting and vertical cutting. Horizontally, you go in and say a 10% cut in every federal agency across the board for next year's budget. That's the starting point. Then you do what I call a vertical cut, where the president, along with the new agency head, you want to run the watch? The new agency head, you do a deep dive and evaluate whole programs. That was a report several weeks ago that talked about all of the overlap and duplication in Washington, D.C. Why? Because no one ever sat down and said, well, how does this overlap with this? Why do we have multiple programs? There was one of them that I can recall where there were 15 different agencies working on the same food safety issue. Well, I think we can eliminate 14 of them right now. That's a no-brainer. So you do so what I'm saying is, rather than just take it over as president and doing all of the presidential balls, first of all, I'm not going to do 20 presidential inaugural balls. We got too much work to do. Once you appoint your agency heads and you get them confirmed, then you sit down with the agency head and all of the senior staff in that agency. Because sometimes the senior staff will work against that agency head and work against the president if they're trying to protect their favorite program. Absolutely. This is part of the hard work of turning a country or turning a business around. When I went to Godfathers was going bankrupt. Just like America is going bankrupt. We are broke, but nobody wants to tell you that we are broke. We just don't have a court that we can file the bankruptcy papers in. I went to Godfathers and I used the same approach. I've used it multiple times and taken over troubled businesses. All of my vice presidents, I called them in. I said, folks, we got problems. We're not going to be here in a year if we don't take some drastic measures. And if you explain to the American people what these drastic measures are, what we need to do, how it's going to impact them, the American people will support it. They're not going to just do something because some political elite say this is what we need to do. We'll go ahead and pass the bill and then we're going to tell you what's in it. That's not how you respect the American people. And so all of our vice presidents came in and I gave them all their marching orders. In 2 days they came back with revised budgets with this first 10% cut. Well, my marketing director, he came back and said, Herman, I can't cut it 10%. I said, why? He said, I can't run the marketing department off of a 10 or 15% cut from last year. I said, Charlie, I guess I'm going to have to redirect your career. Find someone who can. I redirected his career. I found another marketing vice president, and she did an even better job than he did. If you have to make tough choices, that's leadership. So it can be done. We've got to cut out whole programs to begin to bring it down.
James, quick question. Of all the threats facing our country, what do you see as the greatest, and what would you do to fix it?
Terrorism. Terrorism is our greatest threat. Because to quote former President George Bush, we have to be right every time. The terrorists only have to be right once. That's our greatest threat, because many of you probably read stories about homegrown terrorists right here in this country. And how I would fix it is allow the intelligence agencies to do their job. That's the problem. We've got great intelligence people, but their hands are tied in a lot of ways. Untie their hands and let them do their job. This is how we protect this country, from the terrorist threats from around the world.
Great. And then the last question, this is an interesting one. If you have not held elective office, what makes you ready to hold national office? And the questioner goes on to say, Herbert Hoover was a businessman. He never held elective office before the presidency.
My problem-solving approach is what distinguishes me from some of the other candidates, and that is, first, make sure that you're working on the right problem. Did we need Obamacare when we have problems with Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid? We got all the others. No, we weren't working on the right problem. Secondly, set the right priorities. ICE, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. I heard the head of ICE make the statement, quote, I don't have enough resources to do my job. They get about $5.5 billion a year. That same year, Congress approved $16 billion in earmarks. I would have rather had $16 billion going to ICE with somebody who knew what they were doing, because they probably need some technology upgrades, things of this nature. I don't know all of the problem. Put the priority where you want stuff fixed. And it starts with rearranging the budgets. Thirdly, surround yourself with good people. I know a lot of great people that can help us solve these problems. Some of them come from the business sector. A lot of them come from the business sector. Big business, small business, etc. You name it. President Obama's administration has only 7% of the people who actually have worked in the private sector. The lowest in modern presidential history. 7. And we wonder why the policies are not working. even for what he wants. And so surround yourself with the right people, and then you put together the appropriate common sense plans. Do we have booklets? Common sense plans that I talk a little bit more about those ideas in the booklets that we have. And let me give you an example. Energy. We need an energy independence strategy. We have the resources. It was just reported by the Congressional Research Service that if you look at all of our fossil fuels with respect to oil, natural gas, and coal, and shale oil, we have the largest total depository in the world. But we will not develop it because of conflicting interests. We can develop an energy independence strategy. It's putting together the plan to make it happen if the president makes it a national priority. When John F. Kennedy in 1960, even though he wasn't here with us no more than about 1,000 days, when he said by the end of the decade of the 60s, we will walk on the moon. That's leadership, that's determination, that is putting a priority on it. He didn't say, we might. He didn't say, let's take a poll. He said, we will. Since we know we have all of these energy resources, as my grandfather would say, do something. Rather than just sit on them. Let me close out with this, Obed. Thank you all again for being here. I look forward to seeing and talking to you. Let me answer the question that some people didn't ask, but you might have already picked up on. Why am I running? I feel compelled to run. I really do. After the birth of my first grandchild back in 1999, Chris has heard this story. It's when I first looked in her face, and the first thought that went through my mind was, what do I do to make this a better world? That was 12 years ago. And I didn't know what that was going to lead. My life has continued to unfold. And then when I went through the cancer treatment that I was mentioned back in 2006, I had a 30% chance of survival. I had 30% of my colon removed, 70% of my liver removed. And before you go, oh my God, I asked the doctor, wait a minute, if you're going to take out 70, that only leaves 30%. I said, can you live off of a sliver of liver? He said, yes. It grows back. I didn't know that. I missed that in 10th grade biology. I didn't know that. And so I was able to go through chemotherapy, go through double surgery, and go through chemotherapy. And that was 5 years ago. So I believe God has said, not yet. I got something else for you to do. Thank you very much.
All right.
That there was a successful businessman who was visiting New Hampshire today. Indeed there was. His name is Herman Cain, and he came right here to our Thank you all very much. And a little memento of your visit with us, just so you remember us. And also, as things get busy for you, remember where you are. We'd like to present you this little New Hampshire tie. There you go. Herman's going to stay for a while, so please ask questions of him if you like, and thank you for coming. Can we see the time?
Yes.
Okay.